Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Bruce.
Hey, David, how are you doing today?
Good. There's a little bit of lag in our video right now. That's a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's caught up. There we go. All right. Today we're looking at Tyson Barrie, Bruce, and our keep, hold, or fold series. So this is an interesting question. It's on a certain level not that interesting because it kind of seems there's a consensus, a settled consensus, all the insiders saying the same thing generally, which is Tyson Barrie is going to move on. He's going to go to the market and see what the market holds for him, and the Oilers can't afford him, and he's going to move on. And it's a little different. There was a time early in the year for a couple weeks when the hockey insiders, Oilers insiders, were kind of saying the Oilers might try to re-sign him. And we're putting out that idea, when Barrie's game took off, when he started to go into point production mode and eventually became the top point producing defenseman in the NHL in the regular season, which is an impressive accomplishment. So, but that quickly faded, I think, certain realizations set in, namely that he's in his, I think he's 30 now, and players start to trend down. More to the point, they have a very similar player who's 10 years younger and maybe just as good, if not better. We'll see about that because you don't want to get ahead of ourselves on this, but certainly all kinds of potential in Evan Bouchard. So there's a cheap replacement. So Bruce, where do you stand on the old keep, hold, or fold category for Tyson Barrie?
I think I'm in camp fold on Barrie. Tempted to say hold as in see what happens if he, with another offer of the same of what he took last year, but I just don't think it's realistic. So I think the choice is likely to be to move on from Barrie, and it's a more painful choice than, some people sounds like they'd be happy just to see him gone, and he does have his drawbacks as his player, but man, he has his strengths too, and I think the Oilers and especially their two scoring forwards would miss Barrie, but I'm sort of resigned to the probability. He was brought in on a 1-year deal. He delivered value on that deal. He's probably going to get a big raise in terms somewhere, but I don't think that'll be here.
It's kind of one of the lost opportunities of this season, Bruce, is Tippett's reluctance to play Bouchard or any of the right shot defensemen on the other side. Mm-hmm. Because we might have a different thought about this if that had happened and if one of them had excelled on the left side. And it's funny because, when left shot D-men are moved to the other side, people kind of accept that. And it's often because they have more experience playing on the right side. Because it's far more common for that to happen, being that there's far more left shot players in the world than right shot players in the world. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's significant, and there's a lot more left shot.
It'll be 60-40, eh?
I bet you it's even 70-30 would be my gut feeling.
I'm thinking in terms of NHL players, but would be, and righties would have sort of gotten an advantage. It's like having left-handers in the bullpen in baseball. There's not as many left-handers in society as there are in a major league bullpen, but but the business of being right-handed is an asset in and of itself.
If Bouchard had played, if they had just stuck with that for a little while longer, like they would just seem so set on a certain way of proceeding. And it didn't, and it was and Tippett's consistent on this, at least. He wants defensemen on their natural wing or natural side. And he's consistent about that. And he has been both years. And I think it's a good point that he's making. It's a good thought to have. It probably is in the end the best way to go. But you can have success playing on your offside. And Evan Bouchard might have. And if Evan Bouchard had excelled on the left side, let's say this year, or if Ethan Bear had excelled on the left side this year, if that had been the move, then you might be thinking differently about Tyson Barrie. There might be you'd think, why would you get rid of Tyson Barrie? I mean, he was the top point producing defenseman in the NHL this year. Why would you be moving on? He's got certainly, if he's willing to sign on a decent contract, he's probably got 3 or 4 decent years ahead of him. You might pay him and pay the term, and that's your defense. There you go. That said, Bruce, I'm in the fold camp at this point, because Evan Bouchard, from everything that I've seen in the AHL, his AHL scoring in 2019-20 was outstanding. It was at a level that you see most players who scored as a rookie defenseman in the AHL, like Evan Bouchard did, become really good NHL defensemen, and some of them become just outstanding. He was fantastic in Sweden this year when we saw him play. He was moving well with the puck. When he came to the Oilers training camp, he was ahead of the other players. He was in such great physical condition. He really impressed the coaches. His offensive game, his ability to get shots on net from the point, his passing of the puck, I think from what I've seen, there's a chance he's going to be as good as Barrie, maybe as early as next year, and he may be better than Tyson Barrie in the end as an attacker, which is saying a lot, having Tyson Barrie just led the league. I have to be careful, Bruce. Last year at this time, in the summer, I was so bullish on Caleb Jones and thinking he was going to step up and grab that second pairing job and was going to do it, and he failed. So that's a cautionary tale of projecting players for me. Even if you see it with your own eyes and you see it over time with your own eyes, players can take a step back and, at least in the short term, not realize the potential. We'll see if Caleb Jones, I think he's still a decent bet to realize his potential in the future. So I don't see how the fact that they're all right shot D-men, the salary cap is tight as hell. Even for the Oilers, people think the Oilers have a lot of money. They have a lot less money than people think when you think about signing Nurse and Puljujärvi and the wingers they're going to need and raises for everybody as they get better. The Oilers are so tight with money. They cannot afford to go with a more expensive option in Tyson Barrie as opposed to the younger option in Evan Bouchard. It would be salary too many calories on the salary cap. It would be salary cap insanity, and the Oilers can't do that, and they're not going to do it by all accounts. So I liked Tyson Barrie. Bruce, I am with his point scoring, and people have made this point in the past. See what you think about it. So we look at we track how many major contributions players make at every state of the game to grade A chances. That's like a pass into the slot or a pass in the slot. And defensemen tend to make a lot less than forwards because they have much less opportunity to do so. When you translate that number, which for Connor McDavid was 186 times this year in 56 games, Connor McDavid made a major contribution to a grade A chance. No, it's not 186. That's just at even strength. I haven't got the total overall. 186 at even strength, 118 on the power play for McDavid. So add that up in your head.
5 a game.
304. 5.5 per game. And he got 105 points out of it. So that's 35%. That's 35% of his grade A chances, essentially translated into points. Tyson Barrie, and on the average for the Oilers for that kind of translation, grade A points to scoring points, official scoring points, is about 30%. So if you get 90 contributions, you're going to get 30 points. Tyson Barrie had the highest translation by far. He made 86 major contributions to grade A chances this year, and he got 48 points out of it. 56%, Bruce. The average was 30 on the team. Right. So the idea that he might have got a lot of second assists and cheapy assists, that's a fair comment. He benefited greatly from playing with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and making rote passes, average passes, that then turned into goals. And that's not all of his points. He made a ton of great plays, and he was a really solid puck mover in all states of the game. But in terms of his point total, if you're paying for that, I would say buyer beware a little bit on that. Because, again, the next highest Oiler for that was Darnell Nurse, 46%. And again, the team average is 30%. So there's a little buyer beware on Darnell Nurse's offense, I'm going to suggest.
There's an interesting, there's a dynamic at play with that where Uh, if we went through the goals scored where Barrie got a point and saw how many times that we actually gave Barrie credit for making a major contribution to that goal, that percentage would be low.
Yeah.
There was quite a few goals scored where Barrie got a assist or a second assist where we didn't even rate his play. Think of a few on the power play where Barrie carries the puck up to center ice and then he makes a drop pass to McDavid, and McDavid roars up ice and either goes through the whole team and scores, or he gains the zone, makes one pass, and that guy scores, and Barrie gets an assist. And really, I would say he got quite a number of his assists where he didn't even touch the puck in the offensive zone. But what he did do was get it to McDavid and get it to Draisaitl. And I would suggest that if you went through this year and you counted all of Tyson Barrie's passes, probably a huge majority of them would go to those two guys or his regular partner, Darnell Nurse. And in any of the three cases, he was getting the puck onto the stick of someone who could do something with it. So points for that, and literally points for that. He got a few points by doing just that.
What do you think of him as an attacker, Bruce? So where would you rate him in the do you think he is the best attacker? What do you think?
No, I think it's very much a fluke. I mean that he finished first. Between 48 and 41, I think that there was 10 guys all packed into that small range. Nobody in the league really had the opportunity he had of playing with obviously the top two scorers in the league, sharing a power play with those guys, spending a lot of even strength time in a unit with those guys, and he took advantage of that. And as you say, it was more on the point side of the ledger than even necessarily direct contributions. He had his moments. He's a nice offensive player, and he shows up in places where you don't expect. He does have a very good shot. He scored 8 goals. A few of them were on howitzers. Good well placed shots from the point, typically through an Alex Chason screen, and just inside the post. I remember a few of those, but he's. I mean, if this were the 80s and we were measuring offense on points alone, we'd be saying, "What are you, nuts?" He's the third highest scorer on the team with a bullet. He had 48 points, and the next guy was his defense partner, Darnell Nurse, with 36, and only then do you get down to the third highest scoring forward at Nugent Hopkins at 35. And looking at points alone, he was on pace for, if this had been an 82-game season and he kept doing what he was doing, 70 points. 70 points. You know how many Oilers defensemen have ever scored 70 points in the season?
One.
Yeah. Do you know how many Oilers defensemen have ever scored even 60 points in a season?
One.
2. I'm going to surprise you. Risto Siltanen in 1981-82 had 63 points, and he did it in only 63 games. He had a very impressive 1 point per game average. But Tyson Barrie, he didn't quite make it 50 this year, but he only had 2/3 of the season in which to do that. And on a points per game basis, only Coffey and Siltanen rank ahead of him for individual seasons as an Oiler. And of course, Coffey did it year upon year. He had over a 5-year span, 570 points playing defense. Paul Coffey.
Just think if the Twitter had existed when Risto Siltanen was around, the various factions of Oiler fans and the furious debates there would have been about Risto Siltanen. I was a huge Risto Siltanen fan, but I can imagine, because he's one of those players, high skill, a little bit, and a fantastic skater, just, incredible skater, but probably, I wonder how bad his defense was if you looked at it closely. I can't I can't say, because I didn't look at it that closely.
A little bit of Matador.
That's what I'm going to say too, Bruce.
I think, and we can certainly say that about Tyson Barrie, and have said it on more than a few occasions over the season, where the play went through his side of the ice more often than you would like, but I compare him in a sense to Justin Schultz, and I could point out 10 defensemen around the league, guys who are very good offensive defensemen. Defensively, they're a little bit suspect, and the overall net is that it's more good than bad, but it's it's not. He's not Chris Pronger. Let's put it that way, right? I mean,
Yeah. He's in
He's
the
not.
Shattenkirk,
He's not Steve Smith.
Gospodar.
I'm looking at this list of all-time Oiler scoring defensemen. He's not even Charlie Huddy. He is, he brings the offense defensively. He made a few like hero plays defensively, but on the whole, on the defensive side of the puck, he's a liability, and that's why I'm ultimately in the fold camp.
That's a really good reason to be in the. It's why I am as well. It's why during the regular season when he was scoring so well and people were getting exciting about it, there was excitement about the player and people were talking about maybe a contract for this coming year. I just couldn't get there. I wasn't like, he was making too many defensive mistakes all the way along, and they were so glaring, a lot of them, like breakaways, bad pinches. And then as the year went on, it continued into the playoffs. The first couple games of the playoffs, he got taken off the top pairing with Darnell Nurse for a while there. It was a thing of beauty when he was part of that 5-man offensive zone puck moving.
At times.
Where they were moving that around, we counted 3 or 4 times this year where they would have, like, for a minute or more than a minute, 2 or 3 times, and there'd be 20, 30 passes, and it was so much fun to watch and left such a huge impression. But in the end, his defensive play, the only player who struggled more in terms of leaking scoring chances against, grade A shots against, was Caleb Jones. And Caleb Jones, he just had such a high event season. It's like this crazy high event season that Caleb Jones had. But Tyson Barrie was a close second, or he was second to that. Not close, but he was second to that. And in your top pairing, can you really have that kind of a high event D-man? And, I don't think you can. And win in the NHL, I'd be surprised if you could get to the Stanley Cup Finals and win. With Tyson Barrie in your top, no, was he the top pairing?
No.
Justin Schultz is a very good comparable to Tyson Barrie. They're really similar players, and if you have a gap on your blue line with no one there to fill it, and you need if you want to spend $5.5 million, for 3 years on Tyson Barrie, you're getting it. That's a good deal. If you have a hole there and you need that player on your second pairing, even. But yeah, that didn't work out for the Oilers, I don't think, in the end, in the playoffs. And there wasn't. We did a podcast where we talked about Larson making a lot of mistakes. Barrie is just lucky that a lot of the mistakes he made in the playoffs didn't end up as goals against, because by all rights, there was 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 plays that led to the 5-alarm grade A shots, 2-on-1 shots. One of them, Scheifele missed the net when he turned over the puck, I recall, and there was another couple pinches that led to 2-on-1s, and he's just lucky that didn't happen. So I like that kind of player. I like his game, and if the Oilers could afford him, that'd be great. It would be great to have, like, if you think about it, Bear, Bouchard, and Barrie, all these great passing defensemen on your team and moving the puck well, and that's a huge part of hockey. And they are going to miss Tyson Barrie, especially if Evan Bouchard struggles. But I think the bet this year has to be on Bouchard. And in retrospect, I think the Oilers would have been better off this year if the bet had been on Bouchard. That if they didn't know Evan Bouchard was going to have the fall that he had in Sweden, or come into camp looking ready to be an NHLer. They couldn't be sure of that, so they signed Barrie. But I think the Oilers, in the end, would have been better off signing a winger with the money they used on Barrie. And I'm not criticizing this. This is just kind of like this is completely 2020 hindsight. But I think that's, if they had signed a winger with that money, used that money on a winger instead of Barrie, and promoted Bouchard, they would have had better results in the end. Bruce, I want to ask you one thing. So we're in agreement. Right. So one of the things you can do when you're in agreement on something and there's a consensus, is to go, what if we're wrong?
Right.
What if we're wrong here? And so let's just put our heads to that we're wrong. Let's take the premise that if the Oilers re-sign Tyson Barrie right now, it's the difference between them winning a cup or not. If they sign Tyson Barrie this summer, the premise is they will win a Stanley Cup. And if they don't sign him, they won't. So what would be the reasons, like if you were to make that argument in debating, if you were to make that argument that that happened, why did that happen? Why did the Oilers win a cup with Tyson Barrie? This is 5 years from now. Why did the Oilers win a cup with Tyson Barrie? And in that other alternative future where they don't sign him, they don't win a cup. Why did that happen?
Well, why it did, certainly on the offensive side of things, that they had an elite offensive defenseman who has had, many years. He's had 5 years now with 48 or more points in his career, which no Oiler defenseman, has had since 2008-09, other than him with points at that level. He's consistently among the leading producers on the defense. His style of being involved in the cycle game, which really I thought was his real strength, was that 5-man cycle where he'd be so aggressive, like cycling himself, like transporting himself around the zone, getting involved in the puck movement, pinching aggressively up to the hash marks or even down low. That was successful hockey for the Oilers this year, and we're not sure that Evan Bouchard brings that specific ability to things. But at the same time, they would have to be successful, they would have to surround him with other defensemen and players that made up for his weaknesses. So this is a weak argument because I'm not sure I have one.
Okay, I'll try. Here's why the Oilers won a cup with Tyson Barrie, Bruce. As we all know by now, in the 2021 playoffs, there was a number of incidents that caused kind of a shift in the NHL. First of all, Colorado won the cup, as we all know, that year. And they did so with one of the most fastest, exciting teams that we've ever seen in league history. And it brought on an era of an arms race for to get what Colorado has, fast defensemen who can move the puck, make plays with the puck. At the same time, the NHL finally woke up and realized, what are we doing with our stars? We are allowing them to be pummeled and injured by mediocre hockey players. This is a terrible business strategy. We could sell way more tickets by selling offense. We're going to get rid of the Peterborough Mafia. And that's what the NHL did. They cleaned house. They got rid of Colin Campbell and Walcom and all of those people who allow that system of fouling and suppression of offense to go on, illegal suppression of offense to go on. And a new era of offensive hockey dawned in the NHL, where teams are trying to catch up to the Colorado Avalanche. And the only team that really had a realistic chance was the Edmonton Oilers. And they won the Stanley Cup because they made a key bet on Tyson Barrie instead of Adam Larsson. They realized that the game Larson played in this, especially as this game's speeding up, they saw into the future and they saw what was going to come, and they saw he's such a great defensive player. But if we're making a bet, we're going to bet on the attack, and we're going to go with Tyson Barrie and Ethan Bear and Evan Bouchard. And we are going to have one of the best groups of passing defensemen on the right side that the NHL has. And because we made that bet, and we saw what was going to happen, unlike Peter Chiarelli, who didn't foresee smaller, lighter teams. He went to heavy hockey when heavy hockey was going away. Well, it's really going to go. 5 years from now, we see it really did go away. And the Oilers made the right call. And Tyson Barrie, he led the league again in scoring 3 years in a row. People thought it was a mirage, but it happened 3 years in a row. That's some mirage. And in the playoffs, he was able to keep it up. And because of that, Edmonton won the Stanley Cup. So that would be, if we're wrong, maybe that's the argument.
Okay.
Did I convince you?
Well, the Colorado part had me going a little bit. I mean, because of course Tyson Barrie comes from a good Colorado pedigree, having played most of his career there up until the last 2 years ago. But the fact is that Colorado got rid of him in large part because they saw the future, and the future was better with Cale Makar and Samuel Girard, and they've got better players doing the same type of thing, and they're younger players and on the rise. Whereas Barrie, I think, has, I don't see him getting better at this point. And if he's not going to fix his defensive issues by age 30, he's probably not going to fix them. Uh, so, Colorado. I, I have to admit, I was out and out angry on 2 nights ago when Colorado beat Vegas in overtime after getting seriously pummeled in the second and third periods. And in the first minute of overtime, the ref called the chintziest frickin' penalty imaginable to give Colorado a power play. And I said to my wife, the Oilers played 60 minutes of overtime and never got a single power play. Colorado hasn't even played 60 seconds yet, and the refs have just gifted them with a power play. And sure enough, they scored. It was one of those ones where you just hope the other team kills the penalty because it's not fair. And they didn't, and the game was over. And
Colorado's skill, eh?
I may have been making muttered comments about Bettman's Golden Boys and so on, but you wonder, you really do have to wonder about the consistency and the caliber of officiating. And when in some games you can do anything at all, in other games, they decide. I think the refs decided that game with that chintzy call. I do, and. So people say, "Oh, come on, McCurdy! Now you can't have it both ways. If you want them to call penalties, let them call penalties." And I say, "Yeah, let them call penalties. That wasn't a penalty, and somehow that got called." But a guy grabbing onto Draisaitl's stick and holding it for 4 seconds right after a Winnipeg power play, that was fine. Like there just seems to be no level where you can rely on.
And Colorado's power play is such a skill goal, right? Beautiful play by McKinnon, and then I think it went to Makar and then to Rantanen, if I'm not mistaken. And Rantanen just drilled that puck in. That's what skill does for you.
Mm-hmm. Bruce. Well, the Oilers have such a power play, David, but guess what? 60 minutes of overtime. We never saw it once.
Complete and utter bullshit is what it was, Bruce. Let's call it what it was. It was complete and utter bullshit. And the NHL should be ashamed. They should fire Gary Bettman if he doesn't fix it. And he's costing his owners tens and tens of billions of dollars by keeping the NHL in the dark age, by listening to these people who are dinosaurs and Neanderthals. And he should, if he doesn't clean house, he's got to go. So that's my cry du coeur.
This is where your possible alternate universe where the NHL actually took action and got rid of those guys. I'm thinking, I want to move there. That's not this universe.
Well, that's the possibility. That's why you go through that exercise, right? Because you try to imagine things that probably aren't going to happen, but might. And if things turn out differently, how did that happen? I have one final counter argument though to the, keep Tyson Barrie. I think the decision really is Barrie Larson. It's Barrie Bouchard. It's kind of I presented that as I caught the pick. It's Bouchard or it's Barrie. Really, it's Bouchard or Larson, because Bouchard has earned a chance. You're crazy if you do not give him a chance. An NHL team is insane right now if they don't create a spot in the roster for Evan Bouchard on the third pairing to play next season. And you got to create a spot. You hear people mumbling about competition, and you got to earn the spot. Well, in the NHL right now with the salary cap and the way it works, you have to create roster spots for players or they're not going to get a chance. And that's what has to happen with Evan Bouchard. But they could decide to go with Barrie over Adam Larson. That really is the pick. And it's one style of hockey over a different style of hockey that you're choosing because they're comparable ages. Larson has a worse health record, I believe, than Tyson Barrie. So if you're betting on health, Barrie's a little older, but Larson's health record's a little bit worse, and he plays a much more physical game. He's not a good as skater. Skating defensemen tend to do better into their 30s than slower defensemen. So there's some real reasons to pick Tyson Barrie over Adam Larson. And anyone who's arguing that, I don't think it's a crazy argument. I think it's a strong argument. It's valid, and the owner should have that argument. The thing that encourages me, Bruce, is Philip Broberry. In terms of playing a more attacking game, They have these two young D-man in Bouchard and Broberry. And I know Broberry's star is low right now. He didn't have a great final part of the year after he got banged up so much at the World Junior Tournament, and he hardly played in the Swedish playoffs. I saw, though, a lot of games this year where that guy, I saw why the Oilers invested that high pick in him over Trevor Zegras and Cole Caulfield. There's huge controversy about this, and the people who say Cole Caulfield and Trevor Zegras should have been taken by the Oilers, they look right at this moment, and maybe in the future they are going to be proven dead right, and this was a huge mistake. But from what I've seen in Broberry, he is a fantastic package of skills. He's big. He's really big. And he is good with the puck. He can move the puck, skate with the puck in incredible fashion, like few other young defensemen you'll see. His defensive game needs work. He's got to get better at it. He's got to get better at gap. He's got to get better at playing the man. But these are things that can be learned. And, learn from Adam Larson. When he comes to training camp, make him Adam Larson's roommate. Have Adam Larson teach Philip Broberry like Scott Stevens taught Adam Larson as a coach. Scott Stevens did. So I'm pretty bullish on the Oilers' defense as an attacking team. If they can figure out a way to harness Caleb Jones, to get this erratic streak that appeared in his game this year, I don't know why. Can't read his mind. I'm guessing maybe some confidence issues. Being jerked around a little bit in and out of the lineup. Some people react differently to these things, and I think it's harder on some people than others. And Caleb Jones is a hell of a puck-moving defenseman. So you have him, you have Darnell Nurse, you have Philip Broberry, you have Ethan Bear, and you have Evan Bouchard. Mm-hmm. Those guys can all move the puck really well. So in this, I do think actually the NHL probably will be moving towards a more open game. That this is going. There's enough momentum that they're going to take a serious look at it in the NHL. They're just getting hammered right now for the violence, some of the violence in the game, for not punishing it, and for the attack, the suppression of superstars like McDavid and Matthews and others. So I expect there's going to be change, but I do think even without Tyson Barrie, that with Bouchard and Broberry moving into your top four, as I envision to happen in the next year or two, maybe 3 years from Broberry, I think he'll be on the Oilers in the second half of next season, probably.
Okay.
Maybe it'll be longer than that.
Klefbom route, eh?
Is that how long? Well, Klefbom played a full.
Yeah, he came up late in his draft plus 3 year, which is what Broberry is facing next year. He stayed 2 years in Sweden, Klefbom. Of course, he got injured in the second year, hurt his shoulder. So that didn't necessarily advance the cause. In fact, it's still a problem. But then in his third year, he played a bunch of time in Bakersfield, then got called up. His fourth year, he played a few games in Bakersfield, and then he got called up for good. And so that's kind of the template for Broberry, who has a reasonable comparison for Klefbom in terms of his his size, his speed, his overall skill level, and the fact that both were sort of deemed great prospects, but they, really need to refine their game at the time that they were drafted. So now, speaking about at the time they were drafted, Evan Bouchard in 2018, he went in his cluster of defensemen. Number 7, Vancouver took Quinn Hughes. Number 8, Chicago took Adam Boqvist. At 10, Edmonton took Evan Bouchard. At 12, Islanders took Noah Dobson. So the Oilers had a choice between Bouchard and Dobson. Well, Hughes is in a class of himself, I think, of this group. 129 games played. Adam Bouchard, or Boqvist now, is up to 76. Bouchard just 21. And Noah Dobson 80. And I noticed him playing every game in the playoffs for New York Islanders this year, an exact contemporary for Evan Bouchard. And I don't think it's because Bouchard hasn't cut the mustard. I just think it's just an opportunity thing, and it is time that he got that opportunity and was sort of written in pen. He might be third pairing, but he's going to play.
Yeah, they kind of made a bet on Barrie because they wanted to compete for the cup this year, right?
Hmm.
Because when
Yep.
every year you have McDavid, it's so it was a tough year for Bouchard in the NHL because of that. He probably would have been better off staying in Sweden, obviously, the whole year than coming over here for the amount of time he got on the ice. I mean, he did play, what, 15 games. So,
He got 14 games, and he got about 10 in a row when Bear was hurt.
yeah. And the Oilers did really well when he was in the lineup. So,
Hmm.
it's not a disaster what happened. They have him. He's still on his entry level contract, and he will be next year and the year after that, I believe. So,
Yep.
yeah, they've got to create a roster spot for him this year. It's just like they can't bring back Tyson Barrie is the truth, or they got to pick between Barrie and Larson is the
Hmm.
truth to make a spot for Bouchard. Noah Dobson, Bruce, I really liked his play as a junior hockey
Hmm.
player. Man, he
Yep.
looked fantastic. I didn't,
Yep.
but I'm not going to criticize the Oilers for taking Bouchard because from what I see of this guy, I mean, his
Yeah.
passing is just it's like some kind of weird machine where you don't even think he sees the guy way up the ice, and it's tape to tape pass. Connor McDavid is going to love, I think, playing with Evan Bouchard, and Leon Draisaitl is going to love it. They're all going to really love it because I just he's a pretty special attacker, and I hope I'm not investing too much hope in him. I probably am, but from what I see, he's got a real chance to pan out here big time.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing the pick. All I'm saying is that his contemporaries of similar sort of offense first defensemen who got picked, they all were basically full-time NHLers this year, and Bouchard spent a lot of time in the press box, and I think that needs to stop going forward. They have to work him into the mix, or else trade him, and get
Yeah,
fix a different problem. If you got to include him in a package for a big scoring left winger, well, but hiding him in the press box has got to be a thing of the past.
the third option, which we haven't even mentioned, is so you could pick Barrie. You could pick Barrie over Larson.
Hmm.
I mean, you can trade Bouchard if you don't. If you could pick Barrie and trade Bouchard
Hmm.
for a forward to play with McDavid. That's a
Hmm.
possibility, right? You could get a good forward to play with Connor McDavid and have Tyson Barrie, and you'd blow it up for the cup next year. Um, I wouldn't do that. You could also trade Ethan Bear and have Barrie, Larson, and Bouchard as
Hmm.
your three defensemen. That's Ethan Bear, I think, struggled at the start of the year and then came on. And as the year went on, he played really solid hockey, solid two-way hockey. He was part of some of the defensive meltdowns in the playoffs. But this was a team thing where all kinds of players, including Connor McDavid, had struggles with their defensive poise.
Hmm.
Dave Tippett just gave an interview with Pierre LeBrun and Scott Burnside of The Athletic, where he talked about the problems with the Oilers with two things. Players used to scoring points, getting frustrated
Hmm.
with what the game was giving them.
Hmm.
And he talked about an issue with poise. And we talked about this, like the breakdown in composure, especially in game 3 when they were up 4-1, which Tippett was a part of because he didn't call the timeout.
Yeah.
So, and Bear was that. But I just think that these are things that happen in games to players. And I think Ethan Bear is going to keep straight on track to being at least a solid third pairing NHL D man, maybe a solid second pairing NHL D man if he can really get it together. So I wouldn't. I'm not inclined to trade Bear. I would pick Bear over Barrie. I
Hmm.
would pick Larson over Barrie
Hmm.
and Evan Bouchard over Barrie. So fold, fold
And
is
you
my
use Barry's cap hit to
get that
uh,
forward.
cap space to sign someone.
Yeah, yeah. Use it this year. Do what they probably should have done last. If
Could
in
have done.
hindsight, could have done maybe.
Hmm.
I think it would have been fine. Would have worked out okay. I honestly think, but I don't know what for what a 3.75 million. What could the Oilers have
Yeah.
got for that amount? They would have had to buy out James Neal 1 year early and then 6 years of cap penalties because of that to get like Tyler Toffoli. Let's say they had decided to go that route and bid for him. That's what it would have taken. So thank you, Peter Shirley, for the Milan Lucic signing,
Oh,
which I was semi on board with at the time. I was fearful of it, but so
what a disaster
it
it
didn't
turned
turn
out
out.
to be.
Yeah, that's not. We could do a whole Peter Chiarelli's mistakes podcast, but
We could do a series.
we could do a series.
I'm sure I could fill an hour just with his 4 months of the 2018-19 season before he got fired.
He got worse in some ways the longer he was here. He had a few good moves that first season, with Maroon and Cassian and Talbot coming in, and the Sekera signing. Actually, if Sekera hadn't got hurt, that would have really worked out for the Oilers. All right, Bruce. So I think we're in agreement about Tyson Barrie, and we wish him well. I really do wish him well. He's a fantastic attacking hockey player, and
I mean, big picture for just a moment. I mean, he came here, put a 1-year bet on himself, put himself in a good situation where he could fill a void on a team that needed some kind of production from the back end, and he delivered in spades, and he put himself in a great position for his next negotiation.
Yeah.
And he can first negotiate with the Oilers. I don't expect to see him sign here, but I liked a lot of what he brought. I thought he was an entertaining player to watch, and I wish him well.
And a huge favor to the Oilers, Bruce, because if you wanted an advertisement for sign a 1-year deal with the Oilers, play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and see what happens next to your career. If you needed a billboard screaming that out, so I hope Tyson Barrie gets an 8-year, $6 million a year contract with some team. I don't expect that to happen.
I hope not, because the only team that can offer him 8 years is the Oilers.
7 years. Okay, that's a good point. Let's end off with a prediction. What do you think he'll get in terms of contract and term?
I'll go with 4 times 5.5.
I will go. Oh, that's a really good pick. I don't see him getting more than 4. I'll go with 4 times 6. 4 times 6. There's going to be some team that really needs an offensive defenseman and has the cap space. So 4 times 6.
And maybe that team is the Seattle Kraken. And maybe that during the free agent negotiation window that they get before true free agency starts, and they can talk to any team's free agent, and if they sign one, then that's the player they get from that team, and that team is off the hook for having to put other players up to Seattle in expansion. And maybe they'll say, well, we couldn't find a better offensive defenseman out there than the guy who led the league in scoring last year, so we're going to take Barrie, and now Oilers, you don't have to lose another player to us in expansion. That's actually a pretty happy ending. Like that would be a good result for Edmonton Oilers, I think. Let's
just see who's low to the cap. New Jersey, LA, Ottawa, Detroit. Detroit's an interesting one. Carolina.
They got Seitzer coming.
Carolina's not going to get him. They got their own players to sign. Anyway, there's not a lot of teams that have a lot of cap space. This is the problem. This is the problem for Nugent Hopkins, right? Like everyone's thinking. Bob Stauffer was suggesting Columbus with Nugent Hopkins. Maybe that's an option. I'm looking at their cap hit this year, so it's misleading. It's not projected into next year, so. There's going to be maybe the Calgary Flames are going to find some cap space for Tyson Barrie. So we'll see. And anyway, I hope he gets that big contract because that's good news for the Oilers because it's great advertising for the come to Edmonton for 1 year sales pitch.
And I'm rooting for Seattle just for that very reason that would then resolve the Oilers' obligations to give up a player to Seattle, and that would be the player. So. Or if they lose him to free agency to anybody else, there's no benefit to the Oilers.
Go Kraken.
Go Kraken.
Get Kraken. Yeah.
Barrie's your man, guys. Barrie, he's the goods. Right.
He's kind of local, isn't he? Isn't he from BC? Or is he from Alberta? Where's he from?
Where is he from?
I think he's from BC. But that's not.
It's waiting for it to load. He's from Victoria.
There you go.
Victoria, BC, 91. So.
All right, Bruce. Thanks for talking.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.